Hello, this is Dr. Dave Maslak talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3, and in this particular video, I actually want to talk to you about whether you should get a PhD in business administration to become a consultant, a management consultant, or to teach executive education. So I kind of have a funny story with this. But first of all, yeah, I'm a professor of innovation, strategy, and entrepreneurship. And a lot of you might be thinking about getting a PhD in business administration to actually go into a management consulting role or to do some sort of executive teaching because you've heard that it's pretty good money, right? Management consultants can make upwards of four or $500,000 a year, if not more, if they're very good. You might not start out that high. You're probably going to start out at maybe 150 to $200,000 a year, give or take. If you're starting a small consultancy, it's probably about 100 or a little bit less. Um, but you hear about people doing extremely well in those particular roles, executive teaching as well. You hear about people making, you know, I don't know. I've heard numbers from $1,000 an hour to much more than that. Like very, very large amounts of money that some people that are doing executive teaching that's what they make, right? It's pretty good salaries for doing that kind of stuff for a weekend gig. But should you do a PhD in business administration to get into these particular roles? And I'm going to tell you that that is highly not recommended. That is probably the wrong route to actually do those particular roles. A better route to get into management consulting is to go do an MBA. That's going to be your quickest route and go into a really good program where you can, a top program someplace, top 100 program, where if it's in North America, um, there's some really good places in the UK. There's INSEAD in France. There's all sorts of really good places. HSA. There's really good places around the world. There's Singapore. There's the um, there's some really good schools there, and there's the Australian Business School. There's really good schools around that you can get into. That would be very, very helpful to get into management consulting. Executive teaching, it's a little bit, or executive education, that's a little bit difficult to get into. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So what is this funny story that I had? So initially when I was what, 23, 24 at the time, when I was thinking about going to do my PhD, and I was asking different faculty, different professors around about this, and I was kind of like leaning towards, oh, I want to go into consulting, right? That sounds like a really good field to go into. So I asked one of the professors, who is actually a phenomenal, well-known professor, a research professor, that I was like, oh yeah, I kind of want to go in consulting. I was asking them about PhDs, and this person just got up, turned around, and walked away because they knew that they knew that I wasn't serious. I didn't get it at that time what I was talking about of getting a PhD to go into consulting. That's not what you do a PhD for in business administration. Some people do that. There is a small group of people, maybe it's 10 to 20% of the people that go into that, but it's usually after the fact that they discovered that, um, the PhD wasn't the right route for them. So then they end up going into that particular route, which is an MBA is quicker. It's going to be much, even though it's very expensive to do an MBA, it's going to be less expensive in the long run to do that because it's quicker and it's guaranteed return. The marketplace knows exactly what an MBA is, right? A PhD people don't get in the real world, quote unquote real world. They're just not going to get it at all, what you do and what your skills are, and the fact that you actually probably know a heck of a lot more than an MBA does in particular areas, but they're not going to get it. It's changing a little bit. There's some companies out there that are doing a really good job, and they're starting to recruit PhDs in business administration or in judgment and decision making. I've seen that a fair bit, but in general, most people don't understand it. So it's a bad route to go into that. So, um, you know, given that, how do when do PhDs in business administration actually go into consulting? Um, you know, Often there'll be a PhD in business administration will go into consulting really late. That there's sort of two moments when they're going to do that, right? And they might go into a board of directors as well. That's totally cool, or do several boards of directors. So the first one is that when they realize that, yeah, this is not for me. The whole research game is not for me. And that's really what you're doing with a PhD in business administration. You're getting in to do a fair bit of research, and that's your main job, is to actually write journal articles, do research, just reading, writing, and arithmetic every day. And that's really what your job is, to get out there and publish as much as you can. And particularly when you are a junior, and that's before tenure. That is, and I'm still before tenure, coming up close, but that's really what the job is to do as much research as you possibly can, and to sort of set your career going into research. So PhDs that consult, normally there's sort of two moments when they do that. The first one is when they discover, yeah, this whole reading and writing thing and doing research all the time, yeah, it's not for me. Then they go into consulting. That's a totally legitimate route. It's a great route to go into. Um, the other one is when they're kind of later in their career. And the reason why is because that the research, so to do good research, it takes a long time. And when you start discovering that, so to get a couple of really good publications, it might take you anywhere from 5 to 10 years in any particular journal, right? 5 if it's sort of a normal route, everything's kind of okay. 10 years if you've gotten a couple of rejects and a couple of papers, and then finally you get it done. So normally, what people are going to make a sort of a rational calculation in their mind at about 50-ish. Maybe it's 55. They start thinking, maybe 60. They start thinking in their mind, I'm not going to get that many papers done in the next little bit. It's just not going to be possible unless I start doing not so good papers that are quick and easy, and you can get those done in, maybe a year or two. You can get those done pretty quick, but in general, the ones that people read, it's 5 to 10 years. So they're going to make a rational calculation. They're going to say, it's going to be much more lucrative for me to get into executive teaching at this moment, or go into consulting at this moment. So they're going to switch out of that role and go into consulting. The same with executive teaching. Normally, that's somebody that has 20 years plus in this particular career. Sometimes, if you're an amazing teacher in the classroom, you've taught undergrads and MBAs, sometimes they'll recruit young people as well. I've seen that as well. Maybe it's 10 years out, but in general, you're waiting until you're done, you're tenured, before you do executive teaching. That's a really important thing, because then you can start have a little bit more time for these kind of things. So getting tenure, it's gonna take you at American business schools anywhere from 5 to 15 years, depending on what's happening with your research progress. How many, maybe you were lucky and you got a couple of accepts. Your journals got accepted, your articles got accepted, and everything's hunky dory, and you can get tenure right away. Most people, and if you're doing a PhD in business administration, most people, that's going to be your second, third job by the time you get tenure, and that's going to be fairly long in the process. Um, just depending on who you are and what's going on. Maybe things happen in your family, for example, and it takes you a little bit longer, and so you're going to be on the 15-year sort of trajectory, and that's pretty normal to have that anywhere in that route. And so you're normally waiting to do any sort of executive teaching, pretty late. So even if you're young, so I'm young at this stage, right? So even if you're young and you do get tenure, you're looking at 40 if you're doing the PhD in business administration. So you're looking at 40 years old. Um, if you wanted to do executive teaching in an MBA, sort of, or if you wanted to do executive teaching in consulting, you can get into it much more quicker. If you do a phenomenal program, you start sort of promoting yourself. You try to get into Harvard MBA, and you start promoting yourself. You can do executive teaching much more quicker than that, and you'll probably be like 33, 34 by the time you get into it if you do that route. So it's much more quicker, less expensive route to go into it. And then you're not kind of tied to do research, right? So the other thing that happens when you're doing the research route, if you do a PhD in business administration, is you've invested so much in that particular career, and it takes so long to actually do well at it, that by the time you develop this capability to do well, you develop the skills to do well, you you're like at 45 years old, right? By the time you're at the top of your career, you're doing well. You don't want to pass on the reins and start doing something else. Like that is probably a bad use of your skills. So you're better off to continue on doing what you're doing and do the research route going forward, right? And maybe getting some doctoral students that you're working with and that kind of thing. So um, you've invested so much, and yes, I know it's a sunk cost, but there is with education, you have to invest a lot, and you do get what is called what is absorptive capacity. The more that you understand something, the more sort of opportunities you start seeing, and it becomes easier as you start developing the skill. And you might maybe become, you go on an editorial board or something like that. So, that there is you're just unlikely. Once you start getting good at research, you're unlikely to move and to do those other things like executive teaching or, going into consulting. So the better route for that is to do an MBA. Just go out there and get a good MBA someplace and start doing it, right? Like that's really what it is. Learn how to be a good speaker. Go to Toastmasters, regular meetings, and just be a really good speaker and learn how to do that kind of stuff, right? And be just do that route. That's going to be a lot easier. But if you're interested in research, you do an MBA or you do a PhD in business administration. And it's quite interesting. And you can watch some of my other videos for that. That's all I'm going to talk about today. And if you like this video, give me a thumbs up if you appreciate it. And make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'll keep doing these kind of stuff. All right, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.